For decades, we've used one single number to tell the story of a country's entire economy, GDP. But what if we decided to just tear out a massive chapter of that story? Today, we're diving into a really radical proposal to redefine our economy, basically by pretending a huge part of it just doesn't exist. Let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll do a quick refresher on the economy's classic report card. Then, we'll get into this wild idea to completely change the grading system. We're going to see how that would create a super distorted picture, and then, ask the big question. What does a fight over a simple formula really tell us about what we value?
It's all right. Let's start at the beginning. To really get what this debate is all about, you have to understand the main character here, gross domestic product. You know it as GDP. For as long as any of us can remember, this has been the number, the main headline for figuring out how a country's economy is doing.
And just think about how big that is. I mean, GDP tries to count everything. That new car that just rolled off the assembly line? Yep. The coffee you bought this morning? That's in there too. The money you paid your accountant to do your taxes, it all gets added up into one single gigantic number for the whole country. It's really designed to be the ultimate snapshot of all our economic activity.
Okay, so if you've ever taken an intro to macroeconomics class, this formula is probably seared into your brain. It's pretty straightforward. C is for consumption. That's all the stuff you and I buy. I is for investment, so what businesses are spending. G is for government spending. And that last bit, NX, that's just net exports, or our exports minus our imports. It's been simple, elegant, and the global standard for decades.
And this is where things get interesting, because now there's a proposal on the table to take that elegant, time-tested formula and just smash a giant hole right in the middle of it by getting rid of one of its most important pieces.
The idea is, honestly, breathtakingly simple. Just get rid of G. Just strike it from the equation. Pretend it isn't there. And just like that, every single dollar spent by the government, federal, state, and local would just vanish from that headline number. I mean, that is a truly massive, massive change. So you might be asking, what's so bad about that? Well, critics are saying this doesn't create a purer or more accurate picture of the economy at all. Instead, it creates one that's really distorted and totally incomplete. And why is that? Well, it's because the public and private sectors aren't living in two separate universes. They are completely and totally intertwined. And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, look at this. Government spending makes up roughly 20% of the entire U.S. economy. This proposal would basically make 1/5 of our economic activity invisible in the main metric we all follow. And we're not just talking about abstract accounting here. We're talking about the salaries of teachers and firefighters, the concrete we use for our highways, the funding for life-saving medical research. All of it, gone. And this really gets to the core of the problem. The whole argument for this change hinges on one giant assumption, that government spending is totally separate from the private economy. But is it? Is that really how the world works? Well, the answer is a pretty hard no.
I mean, just think about it for a second. The roads and bridges that businesses use to ship their goods, that's Gov making C&I possible. What about government-funded research that leads to the next big tech innovation? Or when the government buys a fleet of jets from a private company, the defense contract creates thousands of actual private sector jobs. Under this new proposal, all of that real, tangible economic value would just disappear from the number everyone's watching.
Now, this isn't just some dusty debate for economists. Changing this formula would have huge real-world consequences. Why? Because we use this economic data to make incredibly important policy decisions. And when your data is warped, guess what? Your decisions are going to be warped too. Okay, let's just look at some of the damage. For one, our debt-to-GDP ratio would suddenly skyrocket. Not because we borrowed any more money, but because the GDP part of that equation just shrank by 20% overnight. Economic growth would look way more choppy and volatile because we'd be totally ignoring the stabilizing effect government spending has, especially during a recession. And on the world stage, we'd look like a much smaller economy, which would lead to some seriously misleading global comparisons.
And look, flawed data leads directly to flawed policy. It's almost inevitable. It would create this built-in bias against investing in long-term things like infrastructure or R&D, because their economic contribution would be literally zeroed out of the metric. It would also throw a huge wrench into global economics, completely isolating the U.S. from the standards used by pretty much everyone else, from the UN to the IMF.
So when you peel it all back, you realize something really important. This whole debate about removing G from GDP, it's not really a technical economic argument. It's actually a debate about values. And yeah,
about ideology.
And this quote really hits the nail on the head. This isn't about sound economic principles. It's about pushing an ideological viewpoint. It basically implies that any public activity is somehow less real or less valuable than private activity. It's saying that a public school teacher contributes nothing to the economy, but a private school teacher does, which from a purely economic standpoint is just wrong. A dollar of activity is a dollar of activity, period. This proposal tries to assign a value of 0 to 1 and full value to the other.
So in the end, we have to remember that a number like GDP isn't just a dry statistic. It's a story. It's a story we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're building together as a country. Changing the formula isn't just about math. It's an attempt to fundamentally rewrite that story. So the question we're left with is this: what parts of our collective story, our infrastructure, our education, our public safety, are we okay with just leaving on the cutting room floor?